Hey, have you ever felt an inexplicable nudge toward a certain direction in your life? Today we are going to look at 3 keys to be aware of that God is moving or working in your life and how to respond. There can be often challenges that are presented to us that cause us to struggle with understanding when God is working or wanting to move in our life. Hi, I'm Ian, and if you're new, I make faith-based content so that people can learn to hear God better and to follow the direction of the God calling on their life. After 25 plus years of working on this and seeking after it, not only in my marriage, but in my life, I have found myself with my family and my children learning to hear and respond to God in the middle of Africa for the last 10 years. And yet, as challenging as that can be, the biggest challenge that I've had over those years is a challenge that many of you might be able to relate to as well, and that's time. One of the things that people struggle with and are challenged with in figuring out whether God's moving and working in their life is time. They don't have enough of it, or they don't believe they have enough of it. Is He telling you to slow down? Is it possible that God's telling you to slow down in life? In the West, things keep getting more fast-paced and more fast-paced, which doesn't help at all. You know, I was in the neighboring country of Malawi one time driving, and I remember something that God told me that I ended up writing a dialogue in my journal about. He said this to me. He said, "You know, Ian, you're not a slave to time."
Yeah!
I remember that impacted me so much that I revisit it often, the conversation I had with him about this, and how he was saying to me that, Ian, you need to realize that time is in my control. I created it, it's in my hands, and I can stop it and start it when I want to. If you will just believe that, you'll stop being a slave to time.
Yeah!
In summary, he was saying slow down and step into his process. Another challenge that presents itself and causes struggle with people learning to hear, to determine whether God's moving, is listening to the status quo. Even in churches or amongst people that are believers, instead of just listening and reading and hearing what the Bible says about being a true disciple. Is it possible that He's asking you to isolate yourself or remove yourself from other voices that are hindering you? And finally, a third struggle that people can often go through when determining whether God's moving in their life is that there's just too many good distractions. This really impacts those in the Western culture the most. Things like phone and technology, hobbies, sports, movies, friends, books. This one might step on some toes. Goals and desires. Another one that can round it out but not complete this list is stress. You see, friends, God is constantly wanting to work and speak into your life, to draw close to you. Are we willing to listen and make changes or course corrections in order to recognize and confirm where He is moving? So here are some practical ways that I've learned after 25 years of chasing this and seeing the most incredible things along the journey. Even right now, as I'm filming this from, of all places, Africa, I've been here with my family and my children for 10 years because I followed these keys. Number 1 key to knowing that God is moving in your life and determining that He actually wants to work in your life. Give Him your time. The best and the first of your time. Friends, especially if you feel or sense an urgency to slow down in your life right now, that's probably Him. You should do it. He is inviting you in to His timeline. And that's always good. There are surprises and protections and healings, revelations and new dreams waiting for you in that space with Him if you'll allow it. How, Ian? How do I do this? Start with this. Find a quiet place and ask Him what He wants you to know. And ask Him what He wants you to do with this time. The time that you're giving Him. And where to do that at. You see, I'm still prayer walking on Friday mornings after 8 years of doing this. and having asked the same question. The bottom line is, if he's asking you for more of your time, it's worth it and it's a compliment to you. Number 2 key. Do you feel possibly convicted to eliminate status quo type voices, commentaries, political channels, even voices in the church? Do it. Focus on ways you can hear his voice in your life. Bible, prayer, silence, time in worship. Start by asking him, Father, are you telling me to stop the noises? What do you want me to know about that, Father? How do you want me to replace it in my life? So God had me do this one time, and it was for an entire year. And then the following year, he let me only listen to 3 people. You know, much of the courage and the faith that I built for things like being in mission in Africa was stirred up in me and built and matured in that time. And Africa followed shortly after it as well. You see, friends, it's very hard to know if he's working in your life if he is the last person you hear from every day. If everyone else is moving you, it's going to be difficult to know if he's moving. The third and final one is he asking you to do something that's out of your head and you're thinking? Have you been having ideas, maybe pictures of things, people suggesting things to you that you wouldn't have thought of on your own normally? And strangely enough, it's scary, but you have a peace about it, like a weird thought that it could actually be possible in some way. Let's look at 3 quick stories of people that might encourage you in this. The first one is Abraham. Many people that believe in God have heard of, or at least know the story of Abraham. But let's consider the summary of what happened. Abraham was invited by God to move away from his people, his family, and his country, his land. Now, for those of you who aren't used to an Eastern context or familiar with the type of history that Abraham would have come from, they were a nomadic people that were probably worshiping the stars and the moons and things like that before God even showed up in their life. Now, all of a sudden, the God of everything, who proves that he's the creator of all the things that they could have possibly been worshiping before him, decides, hey, Abraham, I want you to get up and I want you to move to a land you don't know of. Now, that's very similar to our people group here amongst the Yao. It's unheard of. They don't just leave their family, their community, their cul-de-sac, usually unless it has to do with marriage of some kind. The community structure is so important. And then the father tells him when he actually does it, which is amazing because he's processing the God of everything is speaking to me, I should probably do it. He does it, and then when he does it out of belief and faith, the Lord grants to him as righteousness his belief process and says that he will be a father of many, many nations. That's not a normal thought that would have been in his head, but Abraham understood that God was moving and working because it wasn't something that he would have normally thought. Does that make sense? Let's look at a second story real quick. This man's name was Noah. And Noah, many, many people have heard this, whether they're in the church, believers of God or not, they have heard the story of Noah, or one similar in many cultures, of this man who built a boat during the times of the flood that covered the whole earth. Now, what we don't know, what many people don't realize, is that Noah was told by God to build something that had never been built before. Before Noah experienced the flood, there hadn't even been rain. God was watering the earth by springs from the ground up. Rain and precipitation in that sense had not fallen yet on the earth. So one, they hadn't seen rain yet, so they didn't know how the world would be flooded. Two, he was telling them to build a structure that was to go on water that they had never done before, a boat. This boat structure took him somewhere near 100 years to build. All of these things, we don't know if Noah had any carpentry skills up to this point at all. But we do know that these thoughts and what Noah decided to do in response was all things that would not have been normally in his thought process or his head. How much teasing and resistance did he get from his community over those 100 years? Man, probably a lot. But once the floodwater came, Noah knew that God was moving. Would you be willing to wait 100 years to see if God was possibly moving in your life? Let's look at a third one that maybe we can relate to more. It's not just one person's story, it's a group of people over the time of Jesus. Peter, Andrew, James, John, Matthew, who was known as Levi, and I'm going to throw one in for good measure, Zacchaeus. Now let's talk about Peter, Andrew, James, and John real quick. Peter, Andrew, James, and John were two sets of brothers that were fishermen on a lake nearby when Jesus was called into his ministry, and he was looking for the disciples that God had for him to train. Jesus was walking by the lake, and these men who were in their late teens, probably to early 20s, one set was with their father in the boat, and another set we don't know. Jesus asked the same thing. He said, "Come and follow me." Now, in that time period, that would have been a call similar to a rabbi teacher to a Jewish student. However, most rabbis would have requested a student that had been in Torah school, or that had been in the proper schooling, that had a family lineage that probably was one that lined up with education under the rabbi, and would have made a lot more sense than a bunch of fishermen that were under their father's business that had probably never been under a rabbi. For them, they understood the call, but it would have made no sense, and it would not have been a thought that would have been in their head that the rabbi would have actually chosen them instead of them going and falling at the rabbi's feet, asking if they could be chosen. It was well out of their context, and it was mid-fishing with their father. So they were being called away from their father in the middle of them working. All four of them decided to follow. Now, Matthew and Zacchaeus are the same but different, and here's why. Matthew and Zacchaeus were both tax collectors, people that were kind of actually hurting their people by taking taxes from the Roman government and probably looked down on by their people. Now, what was different about the two of them was this. Similar to Andrew, James, Peter, and John, they probably wouldn't have been thinking that a rabbi teacher would have called them into the ministry with him. That would have been far from their mind. They would have probably even been far-fetched to think that any of the people of Israel would have even given them a second thought to compliment them in some way. But what was different about the two is Matthew heard the physical voice of Jesus when Jesus said, "Come follow me," and decided to do it. Zacchaeus, on the other hand, didn't know what Jesus was up to. He just heard a voice in his head that he needed to go and see what Jesus looked like and what he sounded like when he taught. There was a hunger in him to go see what this Jesus was about, but it wasn't from Jesus. We don't know who it was from. He just had the thought, I need to find out about Jesus. Now, a tax collector that knew about a rabbinic teacher coming would never have thought that he would have been accepted into the group. So he runs away from his tables, away from his business, into a crowd of people that probably wouldn't have had any respect for him, and he climbs up a tree like a child to see Jesus coming. And Jesus stops along the way and says, "Zacchaeus, I must be at your house today." You see, we can know when God is moving or working in our life many times simply by the fact that God's urging us to do something, giving us a creative idea about something we wouldn't have thought of. Will we have the courage to follow it? You see, friends, we need to be prepared and don't miss it. There was a final story in the book of Luke of a rich young man that came to Jesus and tried to ask him what he needed to do for eternal life. The challenge was that God, through Christ, invited him into much more than just what he was asking for, the work that he wanted God to do in him. God actually presented through Jesus the work that God wanted to do in him. However, the three things that I just mentioned actually became obstacles for this young man, and he walked away disheartened. Remember, this is a huge caution for us all, a cautionary tale, if you will, to remember that you can confirm that God is moving and working in your life. You can even know how, where, what, etc. You can know what He wants you to do, and you can still choose not to do it. If you would have asked me years ago if Africa was the place that I wanted to go, I would have told you emphatically that's the one place I don't want to go. I wanted to go to Australia or Japan or South America, but God had different plans. And now I would have regretted anywhere else I went because of what I've seen. You see, there is so much important to the three keys that I just pointed out to you. Give Him your time, allow Him to eliminate voices, and follow when He gives you the ideas that maybe you don't think of yourself. See, there's many believers out there that, just like the rich young ruler, they want to know what God is moving in what God is doing to move and work in their lives. Then when He directs them to trust Him and listen carefully, they often walk away because the things hindering them are deceiving them into believing they are after some other legacy. However, when you look at the men that I just mentioned and how they responded to God, they ended up changing the world and being remembered forever. They're the ones who usually don't get forgotten anyway. Jesus said it like this: what good is it for you to gain the entire world but lose your soul? Hey, if this encouraged you and helped you grow today, if you really want to be like those men that I mentioned, join our email list. Plug into a community that's able to grow together in God and to seek out the inheritance of Christ versus our own legacy. Also, remember to subscribe and like so you don't miss any of the future content. And if you have questions about this video today, or if you have comments about how maybe God's walked you through some of these three areas that I just talked about, the three keys, please share them in the comments so everybody can be encouraged together and we can grow together in hearing God. We love you. Until the next one, walk in faith and go in courage.